Hello, friends. Welcome back to Reiki Crossroads and Connections, where we're exploring the pathways and practices that help you to live a life that is grounded, spacious, connected, and that help us all to remember ourselves. And we're doing that through conversations between a Reiki teacher and practitioners of a wide range of methods, from healing realms, psychology, art, spirituality, magic, science, and many others, exploring connections between these practices to illuminate the healing patterns that humans have created throughout our existence. Thank you so much for joining us for this next few steps of the journey. My name is Michaela. We're really glad to have you here. And today we're circling in with Joan Coletto about heart-centered hypnotherapy. And I am excited about this conversation because hypnotherapy is a topic that I have experienced in just little bites and I have a lot of curiosity about, but not a ton of knowledge. And so that's a great place to start a conversation like this. So let's welcome Joan in. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Michaela. I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too. We've had a couple of really good orienting conversations, and I know there's going to be a lot here for us to explore. So, just to kind of get ourselves gathered in here together to welcome our friends into the conversation, I just want to share a little bit about what I know about you already. We'll use that as a landing board and a platform to jump into the conversation.
Beautiful.
So, part of what I know already is that you've always had a knack for seeing all sides of a situation and having compassion for those who are suffering, while knowing that something greater is absolutely possible for them. Your training in spirituality and in heart centered hypnotherapy has given you tools to support others in shifting their experiences of their life. You became a licensed spiritual practitioner at the Bodhi Center through the international organization Centers for Spiritual Living. I have a few threads connecting to that space. Curious to explore. You were trained in
Hmm.
past life regression therapy by Brian Weiss and in heart centered hypnotherapy through the Wellness Institute. You work with
Hmm.
individual clients, you lead groups, you teach classes and workshops, all while continuing your own transformational journey, which I would say is a prerequisite for any of us doing this work. Yeah. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely. Our work continues
That's
throughout.
right. That's right. And maybe as a result of that, you believe that there are solutions to all of life's challenges. Using various processes you've developed through your training, these solutions are revealed and the richness of life is experienced. Yes to all of
Mhm.
that, right? Who couldn't use more support in it's such a simple statement, right? Life is experienced, right? Like you could say, well, sure, yeah, of course, life is experienced if you're alive, but like how many times are we not actually really present in what our life is experiencing for so many different reasons? And so I'm excited to talk with you about how your heart-centered approach to hypnotherapy can really help reconnect people with the actual direct experience of our lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think it's all really about being present, being grounded. I know you speak a lot about being grounded, being connected. Being connected with ourselves, being connected with source,
Mhm.
that's where it all happens because everything is in the now. The past is over, the future is not here. So when we can allow ourselves to continue to be fully present and awake in the now moment, that's truly where all possibility is.
Absolutely.
And what I've created with my work and my training is a fusion of the spiritual practice and the heart-centered hypnotherapy.
Nice.
And I call it heart shift.
Mhm.
And it's a way that that I work with people that I feel like the hypnosis is sort of like a laser for
Mm.
people to get what is that limiting belief? What is that thing that they're holding on to that has them creating a life that is less than what they desire or
Yeah,
less than what's really possible? And
absolutely.
when we can access this, that that's where the shift can really occur.
Yeah.
So that's so much of the work. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, and to help us like orient into it and maybe start to pull the threads of these things together, I'd love to just have you share a little bit about how you arrived here. We all have many, many threads that we follow in our life.
Mhm,
They weave together to create the tapestry of our life. And in any given
mhm.
moment, one or more of those threads might feel, particularly important, or that might be vibrating in a way that has meaning on a given day. So I'd love to just invite you to share any of those threads of your life that came together to do this work, how they're weaving together, and you know, maybe that fancy way of asking you, how did you come to doing this kind of work?
Yes. Oh, great question. And I would say I was always that friend who people would talk to. They would, ask for advice or support when they needed that listening ear. And I always had an interest in helping people and in being of service. As a young adult, my career path took me in a completely different way. Um, and then as I got older, I realized I was not doing what my soul was really calling me to do. And it began with, in my early 30s, struggling to get pregnant and having miscarriages. And it was a very, very painful time for myself and for my husband. And we found a spiritual center that really gave us hope,
Mm.
and that was that beginning sort of entry point for me. And as time went on, we did go on to have two beautiful healthy children and feel very fortunate for that. And we ended up then moving on to a different spiritual center because it was just easier with our lifestyle, and that was the Bodhi Center. And that's when things really started to move for me, because that's when I found out, wow, I could actually be a spiritual practitioner. I could use these things that I'm learning to help other people. So after 4 years of study, I became a licensed practitioner and started working with people. And from there, I went on to hearing about Brian Weiss and past life regression. I was fascinated by it and went to one of his seminars. It was an amazing experience, and I ended up training with him in past life regression and then going on to do more hypnotherapy work. And that's when I sort of fused the two modalities together,
Yeah,
and that's the work I do today.
awesome. I'd love to just, the term spiritual director, or, someone who kind of holds, formal training and a formal role around, something that might be called spiritual direction. I know it's called slightly different things. That was a concept that was fairly new to me several years ago. And, I was familiar with like pastoral, like spiritual support, but for folks who are maybe unfamiliar with what a spiritual director does, like what that role is, and perhaps in what contexts that person operates. I'd love to have you just kind of describe that role, and then maybe also just describe, like, in introductory terms, what you mean by hypnotherapy.
Absolutely. So the spiritual work, the spiritual practitioner work is, I think the difference, the best way to describe it is it's similar to conventional therapy. However, the big difference is, as a spiritual practitioner, when someone is sitting before me, I know the truth of their being. I know that they are whole, perfect, and complete. I do not see a broken person sitting before me. I see someone with all the possibility and everything right there.
Mm,
So it's that listening as you listen as a therapist. It's asking the questions, hopefully, and more often than not, asking the right questions so that that person can come to some realizations. And what then supports the work is the spiritual practice. Excuse me. So that would be meditation, perhaps visualization, affirmative prayer.
mhm.
So we use the spiritual practices to support the shift that someone is wanting to create.
Yeah, and it sounds like this would generally be presented in a non-denominational way, maybe spiritual practices drawn from various places, or how does that look?
It's absolutely non-denominational. I believe the term that we or that what is the term that we use is trans-denominational. So honoring really all paths,
Mhm.
and it's about finding that source within. So when I was growing up, God was this male in the sky judging me. That's what the religion I was raised in taught me. And I think that can be true for many of us. What I know to be true is there is a higher power, and that is source energy. And it is in me, it is in you, it is in all of us, and we are all connected and all one. So the basis for the teaching is truly oneness and wholeness.
Yeah,
So there's no punishing. There's no something bad happened. I'm being punished.
right,
No,
right.
I don't believe that at all.
Good. Thank you for that context. And then hypnotherapy. How do you describe that as a practice, as a discipline, as a course of study?
Yeah. So hypnotherapy, I would say simply put, is therapy while in trance state. So hypnosis is a trance state. We're in that state actually many times during the day. We might be on our phones, glued to something. We're not really aware of what's going on, driving down some dark road, and we're just really sort of entranced in that. The benefit to being in a trance state during hypnotherapy is that we have access to more memories and we can be regressed, or in other words, guided back to a time perhaps in childhood, a first time we may have experienced something that could have been traumatic and mm, sort of caused that false or limiting belief. So, for example, someone growing up in a home where there were two parents and they got divorced, and let's say one parent left. So the child may then believe, I did something wrong, I'm bad, and that's why mom left, because their whole life sort of is turned upside down. Well, that belief then is carried forward, and that's the belief we want to get to and we want to change.
Yeah.
Someone may realize that consciously in their adult mind that, of course, that was between the parents. And if we don't feel it in our gut and know it, we can sort of act out and move forward from a place of thinking there's something wrong with us. So the hypnotherapy helps us get to that point quickly and efficiently.
Mhm.
And I'd also like to just share the difference between hypnotherapy and hypnosis. They're both trance state. When someone is being hypnotized and they're in hypnosis, the purpose for that is often to plant a suggestion in someone. Like if they're wanting to quit smoking or they want to lose weight or something like that, they might go to a hypnotherapist and ask to be hypnotized to stop that behavior or to engage in a different behavior. So that's very different than hypnotherapy when it is like therapy. You're just simply asking those questions.
So it
Does
sounds like
Yeah.
that through the hypnosis process, you're kind of opening up a door to the subconscious and allowing the person to kind of move into that space in, to whatever degree their mind and their being is able in that moment, and ask questions of those parts that might be kind of running the show, that might be, driving the bus, but that we're not aware of in day-to-day life. Does that sound?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, so it can be very powerful.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would imagine that that kind of work could be really well supported with like embodiment-based practices that help to move those things through. We know so much more about the way that trauma works in the body, and the way that these beliefs kind of work alongside, stagnation or contortion or contraction of the body. So I'm curious if you ever use any embodiment-based practices inside of your work, or if that's something separate.
Yeah, I mean, it is, I would say, something separate. I am not a Reiki person as you are, which I think is such a wonderful modality to help people really release these things.
Yeah.
I do connect people with their body, and the body is often the way in. So as I'm hypnotizing someone, where do you feel that pain? Where do you feel the shame? And that's the way in to
Yeah.
really get to it. And oftentimes, giving voice to that body part can be extremely helpful.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, as an example, I had a client some time ago who had was almost like a nervous habit of coughing, of
Mm.
clearing their throat, like constantly doing this. And they had been to a doctor, and there was no physical cause for it. There was nothing wrong. And as we did the hypnosis, we sort of went back to a time where that first began, and it was completely a nervous habit
Mm.
that had served this person well at that time and certainly was not needed any longer. So that's where then the spiritual practices come in, the things like meditation, positive affirmations, to really flip it and shift it so that they didn't need that habit anymore.
Yeah. I always appreciate the framing of, looking at a thing like that, something that's kind of persistent in our life, that's causing us distress or problems or interfering, whether that's a physiological habit like the one you described, or, any other type of habitual response to stress or stimulus, or, whatever situation. And we've identified it as something that's a problem. We want it gone. We don't want to be dealing with it anymore. I always appreciate the framing of that thing as not fundamentally bad, but something that was a strategy that worked for us at a certain point in life and is no longer working for us. And just the softening around that, and the like, this isn't a part of myself that I have to have condemnation for, or you know reject or be ashamed of, or whatever it is. It's a part of myself I need to understand better, and I need to be in relationship with, and we need to have a way of for that part to express itself and to understand that it doesn't have to work so hard anymore, right? It's like those lone soldiers inside of
Exactly.
us that are just fighting so hard to keep us safe, and they're not needed anymore, but they don't know it. They're probably
Yeah.
exhausted and ready to rest, but
Yes, I think
um
so.
but they keep diligently trying. And so that's been really powerful framing for me. I think probably the most analogous thing that I do in my work is the practice of soul collage, actually, which I work with Reiki and alongside of, but similar outcomes of kind of opening up the subconscious through creative, intuitive collaging, and then kind of surfacing these parts and being able to have these kinds of conversations, and just befriending those parts that are causing us so much trouble, and allowing them to express what they're there to do, be appreciated for that, and then sometimes we even will just do a formal like retirement ceremony, like you may stand down and
Mhm.
rest now, little part that's closing your throat all the time. So
I
yeah, I really
love that.
appreciate that framing. Yeah. Do you find that's
Yeah.
helpful
Oh, I
for
love
people when you work with them in that way?
absolutely, absolutely, because we can attach a lot of shame to these things, and letting it letting it out, first of all, giving it a voice starts to release some of the shame.
Yes.
Being accepted and finding the way through and out can be so helpful to people.
Yeah,
It's completely freeing, you know?
absolutely.
You mentioned soul collaging. I'd love to hear more about that actually, if you
Yeah.
don't mind
Yeah, no,
sharing,
not at all.
because I
Um,
know some of my people are gonna be listening to this. I'd love for them to hear.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a practice that works really. I mean, I've been working with soul collage longer than Reiki, actually, about 15 years, and one of the things that I love that you said was referring folks to other modalities, right? Like part of the point of having these conversations is that there's so many pathways that give us access to similar outcomes, going about it in different ways, and there might be one of those pathways that just really works for a person, and that just really is what works for them, what they follow, what they stay with. Oftentimes, there's so much value in bringing in modalities that work with different parts of our system towards a similar goal. And that's not to say that we need to like heap all the things. Like there's kind of an unbalanced side of that, which I have definitely fallen into at times, where we're just like more things, more things, more things. And that can be avoidance, right? That can be like, oh, I'm not going to stick
Yes.
diligently with something. I'm going to go a little bit with it and then shift to something else, right? So not talking about that dynamic, but more the idea that that these practices can complement each other really powerfully. So that's what I've
Mhm.
found to be true in the ones that I've cultivated, and it sounds like similarly with you, with spiritual direction and with hypnotherapy. So soul collage is a practice of intuitive collaging, and it's drawn from Jungian psychology. The woman who developed the practice is Sina Frost, and she was a Jungian psychologist. And so it's really, leaning heavily into, concepts and frameworks around the subconscious, and just, kind of this framing that we just talked
Mhm.
about, that there are so many, the majority of our beliefs and our values and our drivers and our responses and why we think and do certain things are happening below our consciousness. We're not actively aware of them most of the time. We do have access to them. We can get to those places, but it's a matter of kind of stepping outside of our ordinary day-to-day thought. And I've always been fascinated with practices that do that. And what I found is that there are some that go in intellectually. There's a practice called overcoming immunity to change, which does this through kind of an intellectual analysis process, which is really fascinating. Hypnotherapy is one that does that using trance and, as you say, entering through sensation in the body, which is so powerful. Collage does that through the intuition, the imagination, and found images, and allowing those things to kind of alchemize into creating essentially an image, like creating form and a voice for these parts of ourselves. So you end up with a deck of cards they're each 5 by 8 inches, so like that, and
Mhm.
each one representing a different aspect of yourself, which, how many aspects of yourself are there, right? Maybe infinite. I haven't gotten anywhere near the end of my list, about 200 cards
Mhm.
so far. But, different aspects of your personality, of your identities, beliefs, and values that you hold, parts of you that have been impacted by relationships in your life, um, cards representing wisdom of the body, so different parts of the body, which I advocate for that being a broad category. There's a specific, fairly narrow way in which the process itself defines that. But for example, for your client with the throat clearing, right? I might encourage him to make a card representing the throat and that particular phenomenon, as part of this category of cards that's about what the body knows, right? And what the body has to tell us. What does that part of his body have to say? What does a whole and clear and clean version of that part of him, feel like and look like, and what's going on there. Um, and then archetypes. What are the archetypes in the world that are active in our life? And so, for those who know anything about Jungian psychology, he did a lot with the concept of archetypes, these forms that show up again and again repeatedly in human culture across time, that we both mythologize. Our deities, our gods and goddesses, our mythology, are all about those archetypes. We see them over and over.
Mhm.
And then how they show up in individual people, like we all know
Mhm.
people who, like, oh, that person embodies the kind mother, that person embodies the trickster, that person embodies courage, a warrior spirit.
Mhm.
So these archetypes show up both in our collective consciousness and just in our lives. And so, identifying which of those archetypes are really alive in my life, and when do they strengthen me and inspire me and are part of, my allies in the unseen realms, and where do they get out of balance and maybe overwhelm me, or drain me or hyperfixate my attention on something. And so,
Right.
with all of these categories, giving it a form, giving it a voice, giving it a community with the other cards where they can talk to each other. You use them like an oracle deck, like a tarot deck, but the wisdom of that oracle is coming, you're making your own meaning of the cards rather than it being interpreted from the outside. And that, allows you to really see in, below the surface and kind of see those patterns that are running that you maybe haven't noticed. And then to tend to heal, to do healing work with those parts. And there's, many layers of how to do that, but that's the gist. Yeah.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about intuition,
Mhm.
and that is one of the things that I love to teach my clients, how to truly listen to and trust their intuition,
Yes.
because I believe we are always being guided.
Yeah.
And the only question is, are we listening? Are we
Yeah.
trusting it? And are we following that
Yeah.
guidance? And I think that is such an important skill and
Yeah.
thing to be able to do.
I have a particular interest in the intuition as a phenomenon and have done a fair amount of work with it with clients. And I'm curious how you define intuition for you. What does that mean?
So for me, it is this inner knowing.
Hmm.
It's being connected to that higher self. As I mentioned earlier, the concept of oneness, that we're all connected, that source is in us, as us, through us. And it's really connecting with that part of ourselves. We might feel it in our gut, in our heart, in our chakra, we can feel it wherever. I think it's individualized, but when we can really tap into that part. So I have a process that I've used with clients, sort of guiding them to a time when they felt like they knew something, they had that feeling, and they followed it, a time when they didn't follow it, how they know the difference, how they know when it's really. So it's truly by guiding them in hypnosis to times where they actually did connect with the intuition, and times where it was all coming from up here. Like, this is what I should do. This is what
Right.
like
Or one
some
of
of their
those little hurt
motivation.
places that's inside that's trying to keep you safe. And so telling you, run away from that thing. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And then we think about fear and the different types of fear. There's that fear because you're doing something that's stretching you. It's something new. It's not bad. It's a growth, and there can still be some fear. And then there's that fear that truly keeps us safe. That's like, hey, don't go there or don't do that. So really, that being in touch
Yeah.
with ourselves and that part of ourselves is vitally important.
I love the way that hypnosis, in the way that you're describing it, can help to kind of do a review, right? Because like when I've done similar things with people around intuition of, there's a certain way in which the way we learn the language of our intuition and to discern it from the language of other aspects of ourself that are also talking to us all the time. Part of it is in looking at past experiences and then assessing the outcomes, right? Because sometimes we can't tell in the moment, is this my intuition or is this, some part of myself that's
Mhm.
terrified because as a tiny child, something happened. Um, and sometimes the only way to really know is to see what actually happened as a result of making that choice, right? And so being
Exactly.
able to kind of go back and like, review that arc of,
Mhm.
stimulus to decision to action to outcome, I would imagine is very helpful. And we can do that in our conscious memory, but to be able to do it in that space where you have more access to more data and more
Yeah.
information from the subconscious, I can see being incredibly valuable. Because that is,
Yeah.
whenever I work with people in intuition, I'm sure you get this question all the time. How do I know? How do I know the voice is the one that I should be following or not?
Right. Right. So it's practice like anything else. It's practicing listening
Yeah.
and getting in touch. And, you know, the other thing I want to mention, when we look at the past, it's truly for educational purposes only.
Yeah.
How can I harvest the learning? I don't want to stay in the past. We talked about that in the beginning. We want to be present and alive in this now moment. We look at the past to to understand it, to learn, so that if there are things that did not work out, choices we made that were not in our highest and our best, so that we don't make those kind of choices again.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people will come to me because they have these repeated patterns of
Yes.
choosing the wrong job, choosing the wrong partner, you know,
Yes.
whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And so it can be very helpful to look at where those choices
Yeah.
come from.
I think that's a really useful distinction. I mean, I hear in a lot of what you're saying a lot of perspectives that come through, spiritually a Buddhist lens. I mean, I'm recognizing a lot of alignment with
Mhm.
the foundations of Reiki, which is Japanese Buddhism and Shinto. And, and I would imagine coming through the Bodhi Center that there's definitely a thread there at the very least. Around Buddhist thought and concepts like oneness, like integration, like being present in the moment are with that. And then so I love this distinction that like working with the like being present in the moment, being focused in this moment, being integrated in this moment doesn't mean that we forget everything that's happened to us and we no longer use it for reference points, right? But I think the
Right.
key is to what degree are we able to actually consciously direct our attention to those times and then bring it back. Because what, is so often the case is that we slip into rumination on the past and we get pulled there all the time and we're not able to pull ourselves back into the present and make that
Mhm.
conscious decision to look at that data, to look at those experiences as information and as learning, as school education, as you said,
Yeah.
but rather to spend quite a bit of our consciousness there, to ruminate there, to be in regret, to be in analysis, to be in, just spinning it out, or to be
Mhm.
in, the fondness of like, oh, the good times that were in the past, but rather than, being now. And so I think that's an important distinction and incredibly important skill set, and the system of Reiki, when practiced from its Japanese origins, which is, how I approach it, which is in many ways a different system than the Western system. It's all about training our mind to be able to focus where we want it to be able
Mhm.
to focus on the body, to be able to focus on our thoughts, to focus on our connection to earth, on our nourishment from that connection, to be able to focus out into the far reaches of the universe if we're in such a meditation, to be able to focus on the precepts of the practice and to really spend time with them, to contemplate how they are active in our life and so on. And part of that can include choosing to focus our attention in these places in our past where things that are meaningful happened that we haven't yet made meaning of, and to be able to do that. But again, the key being, can you bring yourself back to now, or are you going to get stuck back there? And it sounds like that's central to what you're doing, is training people to be able to do that, or creating a container where they can do that.
Exactly. And that's one of the spiritual practices, visualization specifically, can be extremely helpful. So when we've gained the learning from the past, we know a behavior or belief that we want to shift, we can use visualization to actually see ourselves making different choices, or see ourselves doing those things that we desire to do, that we know are in our best interest. And when we use the power of visualization, the power of our mind, we're creating new neural pathways. And we don't need to go back to those experiences of the past. When we really work with these practices, with meditation, with visualization, it can help us really truly release it and change our consciousness, change our brain, really.
That makes me curious about something, a little bit of a side quest question, but when you talk about visualization, one of the things that I've really worked with quite a bit, and this went back to working with students in university contexts and, still very much relevant in the work that I do now, but is working with the ways in which we have different ways of learning and different ways of accessing information and accessing our interior spaces. And it was quite an interesting thing when I realized that not everybody visualizes, right? I visualize, I can create images in my mind, and so I can follow a guided visualization fairly well. And in fact, I struggle to integrate information that I only hear. Like if I only hear the information, it's harder for me to integrate it, understand it, remember it. Which is why name tags versus hearing a person's name will always work better for me. I can't remember it if I only hear it.
Right.
And so, and then other people are kinesthetic, they need to really move their body and feel it in their body or in their
Mhm.
experience in order to understand it, assess it, analyze it, remember it. And so I'm curious if you run into that at all, if the practice of visualizing is challenging for some of your clients, and then how you might work with that. Because within the system of Reiki, there's intentionally practices that lead with the body, that lead with the mind, lead with the breath, lead with the energy,
Mhm.
help to kind of account for that, which is something that I've always appreciated.
Yes, yes. So when I do visualization with people, and it can be more challenging for some than for others, I try to bring all the senses into it,
Mm.
not just the visual. So when I'm guiding someone, they are most likely in a trance state already, so they're very receptive to it, which is helpful. And so let's say I'm guiding someone to be in their favorite, most relaxing place, something that I want them to have an anchor where they can go if they're feeling some trauma, during a process. So I will have them, go to a favorite, most relaxing place for them. Maybe it's a beach, and I'll have them feel their toes in the sand and imagine it. And they can start to feel that way, or feel that breeze going through your hair, or the warm sun,
Hmm.
sense the aroma. And when you're in a trance state and someone's telling you, I mean, I remember one of my first times being hypnotized, and they were saying, imagine that you're biting into a lemon. And I mean, my mouth was watering. I was puckered. It's unbelievable. So with the trance state, the visualization can come pretty easily because you can bring all the senses
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. So you can access those memories through physical sensation and other senses that doesn't require a mind's eye or the ability to visualize images. Yeah, that's cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I've heard, kind of pieces of this throughout what you're talking about, but I'd love to just kind of ask you to reflect on this directly. I often talk about some of the outcomes of practicing the system of Reiki from the perspective of its origins are that we come to live a life that feels grounded, that feels spacious, that feels connected, and that helps us to remember ourselves. And that's directly related to the energy map that's used in Japanese systems of spiritual practice that has us begin with a rooted, rooting practices, grounding practices that connect the body, that are about the body and the earth, and the sensation of grounding and focus. Once you've done that, you can move into spaciousness, into the territory of the mind and the spaces all around and above us, and the territory of possibility and vision. And then when those are harmonized together, you come to the heart, the territory of courageous, compassionate connection. And so these three qualities of being kind of working together in a series and reinforcing each other and ultimately integrating all of the parts of ourselves so that we can feel like we've come home, like we've remembered ourselves.
Mhm.
And you spoke
Right.
to that.
Yeah.
You're holding the knowledge that this person is whole and is clear and is
Mhm.
home, and it's more about remembering that and experiencing it rather than causing it to be so because it's already so. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that, the ways in which you see your practice perhaps bringing some of these outcomes into people's lives.
I think that what happens is people become more conscious.
Mm,
I always give my clients homework to do in
mm,
between sessions. And oftentimes that homework is meditation, because I think meditation can be extremely grounding and connecting. It can also support people in more easily getting into that trance state. So what I find is as people go through my heart shift process and experience it, they are more grounded. They are more at peace because they've learned how to center, connect with themselves, listen to themselves, trust themselves, distinguish between different types of fear, and it makes it a big difference. And as I had mentioned to you earlier, I've written a book called Heart Shift,
Yes.
and that book has a lot of the stories of clients and how they've gone from here to here
Yeah.
and what the process has been for them.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about the book. It's going to be released early next year, but it's a book of hope, and I think my intention for writing the book is to give people hope, so that they can see, well, if this person went from this to this, I can do that too.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about the heart shift methodology. You've spoken about the kind of two strands of it that come together, but I wonder if you'd like to say anything more about just the specificity of heart shift
Right.
hypnotherapy versus
Hmm.
anything else that people might encounter.
Yes. Yes. So I think the main difference with heart shift is it is unique really to each person. So there are, and the whole point is to make that shift, to make a shift at the level of the heart, at the level of the gut. So it is unique to every individual. It depends what they come into my office with, what they're working on, what they desire, and it depends on what we uncover. So it's not a straight line path.
Mhm.
There's a guidepost, so to speak, but it does really vary. And I think that that's the thing that makes it effective. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's unique to each person.
Yeah, I love that. A practice that's able to be both firm and flexible. We talk about often in the courses that I teach that we want to practice
I
that has
love that.
structure. Yeah, we need enough structure, enough containment to have our practice be held and to, feel the boundaries
Mhm.
of it and to know that we're inside of a specific practice, that we're inside of those traditions, that we're um, that we're being held. We're not just kind of doing whatever. That we have guidance and we have structure, but at the same time, we
Mhm.
want it to be flexible enough that we can bring our full self to it and we can bring our particularities and we can respond to the moment of whatever is happening and respond to things that are coming from the outside and from the inside as well. So yeah, it sounds like that you've created that sort of condition that it's both firm and flexible for people. Yeah.
Yes. And I love that. Firm and flexible.
Yeah. Yeah. My Reiki teacher says that all the time. It's one of his mantras, so I've adopted it. Yeah.
Mhm. I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. So you have the book coming out next year. You've got your practice active. Share a little bit with folks about how they can connect with you and how they might learn more, how they might work with you if they feel drawn to this work.
Yes, I would love that. So there are several ways they can connect with me. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, if they would like to connect in that type of way. I also have a free gift for those listening to this recording, to this YouTube. It is a 5-day self-care blueprint for overgivers, I call it. And
Thank you.
it's yeah, it's some practices for people, and it's basically um, much of the work that I do. It's a sample of that work, so I'd love for people to sign up for that. It's free. It's something they can
Oh,
do. They can also visit my website. There's a link. They can book a call with me and see if we might be a good fit and if they might like to work with me.
amazing. All of those links will, of course, be down below in the video description so that you can easily get all of that goodness. That's a very generous share, right? This ability to kind of walk through the work that you do in a bite-sized way and get that sense of it. I love
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. Well, I love these all of the connections between our work and yet some of the really powerful differences and uniquenesses in what you bring. Again, as I said at the beginning, I'm so inspired by the ways in which we can journey to similar destinations following these different paths, and that when we allow them to work together and be colleagues of each other and be accessible to people, that we can, that it's just that journey is so much more rich. It's so much better provisioned
Yeah,
to get people to those destinations. So thank you so much for the pieces that you're bringing into it.
you and thank you. I
Yeah.
love hearing about your work also.
Yeah. Well, we love to end with one final question, which is simply to share something that is bringing you joy these days.
Mm. I would say something that is bringing me joy, what just popped into my mind is simply being of service. I have been making myself more available, and it feels good. It feels really good to be of service.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. The thing that comes up for me in this moment, it's two things that are interconnected. One is I've been going for long walks in the evening. We have these blisteringly hot days that where the weather is trying to kill you, and you have to kind of hide. And so I'm not getting my steps in. But once the sun goes down, it's still very hot and it's still very sweaty and a little hotter than I typically like, but the sun is down, and so you're not like assaulted by it. And I've been really actually starting to enjoy that sensation of kind of walking vigorously in heat and just sweating and breathing and kind of being in the evening time. And our local cemetery is a few blocks away from me. It's a really beautiful space to walk. And the other thing is bringing me joy. This is maybe an odd thing to say, but I've really worked to get here. Is that a dear friend and mentor of mine recently passed and is now in that cemetery. And this is the first time I've ever lived in a place where I knew somebody in the cemetery, which is an
Mm,
interesting thing to contemplate. I've always lived somewhere else from where like my people were, um, and it's been really powerful to just go and visit my
mm,
friend on these walks and say hi and sit with her for a bit and just kind of feel that sense of place that that's new. It's a new experience for me,
mm.
and it's joyful even though it's also sad because we lost her. So
Yeah,
yeah, hot evening walks to the cemetery is what's bringing me joy this week. That's where
lovely.
I'll land.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Joan, thanks so much for coming into this conversation, for sharing the pathways that you have been exploring into this work and the way that you share it with other people. I know people are greatly benefited by this work, and I thank you for doing it. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you and being here. I really appreciate it, Michaela.
absolutely. And so, friends, for those of you who have been along with us, watching on the YouTubes, on the podcasts, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure that there's something from this conversation that has touched you in some way. I would love to know what that is. Share it with us down below. Share any questions that you have, any experiences that you've had with hypnotherapy, with spiritual direction, or any of the other things we've talked about. And any questions that you might have for Joan, I will pass them along. And be sure to check out the links that are down below that have some really lovely resources for you. And as you move from here into your day, for whatever this day brings to you, may you be deeply provisioned for it. Thanks so much for being with us. Until next time, we love you. Goodbye.